Welcome to this HTML video where we'll be discussing forms. So forms are a way for the user to interact with your website and fill in some data and send it to your website. And we start forms with a form tag, and then inside the forms have inputs. And inputs allow the user to fill in some data. Now, the most common input is a text input, and we have the type of the input here and the name, which is really important when we go to process it or collect all the data that the user might send to us. Now, a form tag has two attributes that are really important, and one is the action, and this is where we submit the form to. So when you submit a form, it's just like clicking on a link and you go to a new web page. So this is the web page we want to go to when they click the link. Now that web page is what's supposed to take the data that's sent to it and process it, maybe insert it into the database or something like that. We also have the method, and we'll start out with the get method. Now these inputs are called form controls, and I've added an email and also a submit button that allows you to submit the form. And so when we fill this out and submit it, I haven't created this processing.html, but we can see that the data that we submitted in this form is contained right here. After the question mark, we have the first name, which is the name of our form control, and then the value that I put in, and then with an ampersand sign to separate the email with the name that I put in for my email. Now that's the thing with the get method. When you have a form that does the get method, it takes the data and puts it up inside of our URL or the address to display it. And that's really good. If we're searching, it allows the person who searched on the web, let's say on Google, to copy and paste that URL, give it to someone else, and they'll see all their search results. But that's not very good if we're logging in or signing up or creating something else. So the other method that we would use is a post method. So with the post method, if we fill out this form and submit it, we still go to the same action. So we're going to processing.html, but now all the data is not up in the URL, but it still is sent to the web server. Now it is important to know that none of the data that you send in a form, either with a get or a post, is encrypted. And people who are sniffing the network can see that stuff in plain text, including passwords. So that's why it's important that you use HTTPS. So one problem with this form is we don't have any labels for our inputs. And another problem is all of these tags are inline tags, so we don't have any line breaks. So the best way to deal with that is to surround each input with a div tag. And then we'll have our form controls on separate lines. But another problem we have is with accessibility. When a user using a screen reader clicks in here, he needs to know what this field is for, so we'd like the label to be connected with this field. And there's two ways to do that. We can add a label tag that surrounds both the label and the form control. That way we know that this labels this input field. But when we do this, sometimes it's a little tricky to get our styling correct, to be able to align all of our elements up on the page. So another popular option is to have the label tag in front of the input, and then we still need to connect them up. And we do that with an ID. And so we put an ID on the input tag, and then in our label tag, we say it's for that input. And so it's the IDs that we want to connect up into the for, and now screen readers will know what to say when the user clicks in this field. So I've added that to my email field as well. Let's go ahead and copy and paste this and create a password field. Now it is okay to have the ID be the same thing as the name. Just know that in this for field, it needs to be the ID that you link it up with, not the name. So we have this password field, but you can tell as soon as I start typing, you can see your password. So how do you hide your password? Well, the input type you change from text to password. And now you can't see your password. So I've added a few more form controls to our form, and one of them is a radio button. Now, a radio button works like this, where you can select one or the other. And the important thing for radio buttons is that you use type radio, but you also have the name be the same. If I have a different name, then when I select one, it won't unselect when you select the other one. So you have to have the same name, and then you use the values are different, and that's whether you know, that's how you know whether they selected the male or the female version. The next is a checkbox where you can check one of the box or not. And then we also have a select box right here that has a drop-down list of stuff that you can select. And then we have a text area. And if you notice, I have the opening tag here and the closing tag right here. But when I do this, if I highlight, you notice that I have some space there in my text box. If I kind of click and I start typing, it doesn't show up at the beginning. And that's because whatever we put in between these two tags shows up in between them. So usually you want them right like that. But if we put some text in there, you can see that it shows up inside of that box. Now, likewise, if we want one of these states to be selected by default, we can put selected in there, and you can see that it changed so that we're selecting the state Hawaii. We can also put checked inside of our input field right here, and that will check our box. And the same thing with our radio button. If we want one of them to be checked, we can put checked inside of there. And we can also put on our fields here a value. And the value will show up in that field. You can also put a placeholder, and the placeholder is a grayed out kind of hint on what you should type into this field. And notice when they click in it, the placeholder doesn't highlight, and as soon as they start typing something, the placeholder disappears. Now, all of these form controls have been around for a long time, and there are some newer form controls called HTML5 form controls. And the first one is for email fields. So instead of putting type text, we can put email. And the main thing that will happen is when you're on a mobile device, when you click inside of this email box, it'll bring up a keyboard that allows you to type in emails really easily without switching keyboards. But also, when we try to submit our form, if we put in something that isn't an email, it tells us that we have to put an @ sign or something so that we can, before we submit the form, so that it kind of validates that we have a real email in here before we submit. Another HTML5 form control is the date field, and you can see that we got a little calendar selector to select our date. There's also a date time selector, and there's actually quite a few more form controls, but since they're all pretty basic like this, I'm going to let you just look those up on a website like W3 Schools, and you can try those out on that website.